All right. Excellent. We are now being recorded. We've also turned on captions for those that assists. So hopefully this training will be available afterwards for those who want it and will be nice and accessible.
Very nice chairs on her.
All right, please do make sure to keep yourself muted. I've been trying to mute as people come on. We will allow time as we go for questions and answers. Feel free to put questions in the chat as we go through, and then I'll stop kind of throughout to allow time for live questions and answers as well. But as we go, chat will be the best way to try to get my attention. And again, we'll stop a couple times throughout the training to see if anyone wants to check in and throw out a verbal question. If I could get someone just to confirm in the chat or a thumbs up if you're on the screen that you are seeing the slides and that it just progressed to an agenda. Excellent. All right. Thank you, Savannah. Okay. So our agenda for today is to talk about NSPIRE, which of course is the new inspection protocol that, depending on which affordable housing program you're working with, is either already in effect or will be coming into effect at some point in 2024. So we know this is certainly a timely topic, and we're excited to go over this material today. My name is Matt Rayburn. I am the Chief Real Estate Development Officer and Deputy Executive Director for the Indiana Housing and Community Development Authority, IHCDA. Assume many folks on this call have IHCDA funded properties, but some of you may not. Maybe you're just working with some HUD funded properties, or maybe even have properties in other states, but saw there was some free training on NSPIRE. So welcome, whatever brought you here. We're glad you're here today and hope this answers your questions. For the most part, this training will have pretty broad applicability on NSPIRE. There will be some spots along the way where we get into a specific IHCDA policy. I will make sure to flag that it is IHCDA policy so that you understand that you might need to get clarification from other funders, from other states that you work in, et cetera. But most of this will be going by the federal requirements of the NSPIRE. So for the agenda, we'll start high level with a quick discussion just on, well, what is NSPIRE? What is this all about? Why is this happening? From there, we'll talk a little bit. This will be probably the dullest part of the training, but we need to talk a little bit about this concept of what has HUD told us so far. So what guidance do we have? What guidance is missing? And as we look at that various guidance, what do we know right now about what is NSPIRE applicable to and when is it applicable? So we definitely need to dig a little bit into that applicability and timelines here. We'll then move more into really what NSPIRE does. So we'll talk high level about the focus of NSPIRE and how it somewhat changes the focus of physical inspections at our properties. From there, we'll go into what NSPIRE defines as the inspectable areas and this kind of new concept of what NSPIRE calls affirmative habitability requirements, bare minimum things that you must meet in order to be providing safe housing and to pass an inspection. And then we'll explain really the process of, if you have an NSPIRE inspection, how does that inspection process work, and specifically, how are you going to be rated under that inspection? So we'll look at severity levels, what elevates up to a life-threatening condition, and then we're not going to have time to go through all 63 today, but we'll show a slide that shows what are considered the 63 different standards under NSPIRE. So all the different things an inspector would be looking at in a unit or a building, and then we'll pull out 3 or 4 of those that are kind of key importance, or maybe have something that seems new or somewhat groundbreaking, and talk through what those standards say under NSPIRE. That will also just kind of help give an example of how to read the NSPIRE and standards. Then we'll end with just a few notes, other things to make sure that everyone feels NSPIRE confident, and go from there. So, all right, with that agenda in mind, we will go ahead and dive in as we continue to get more people up to almost 100 now. So again, thank you all for being here. So first and foremost, wanted to start today's training with this disclaimer, and the disclaimer here being that NSPIRE continues to be an evolving topic. There's additional HUD guidance that has been coming out kind of throughout this fall, and there are certain areas where we do expect additional HUD guidance to come. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of those areas we do know or expect more guidance, but we of course don't yet know where that guidance will fall or what it will say. So as this disclaimer, we would say, hey, this material is current as of 1:30 p.m. on 11/27 of 23, but it is subject to change via additional HUD guidance. This presentation itself should not be quoted as a final policy. We actually did issue some updated compliance manuals, you may be aware, with a lot of focus on HOTMA, which is a separate topic, but we did get revised compliance manuals out a couple weeks ago, so that would be the final kind of IHCDA policy that you could quote and rely on. This is not a fully comprehensive everything Inspire training. As I mentioned, we're not going to have time to go through all 63 of the Inspire standards. And because of the audience, knowing that this audience is primarily IHCDA partners, the folks involved in the low-income housing tax credit program, the home program, et cetera, what we're not going to go into today is the detailed way that scoring works. So if you had a project that under the old inspection protocols had an inspection, received a report, but did not get a REACT score, you're still not going to be scored under Inspire. So we're not assigning an inspection score on a tax credit project, a home project, et cetera. Those of you who work in some HUD multifamily, public housing type programs are scored on inspections. The scoring system does change from what it used to be, but that will not be what we dig into in this hour-and-a-half training. So if you're interested more in the scoring system, there are some notices out there. We'll do an overview of HUD notices in a moment, and I'll point out one where you can get more information about the scoring system. All right, so with that, what is INSPIRE and what is the purpose of all of this? So INSPIRE is an acronym. It stands for the National Standards for the Physical Inspection of Real Estate. And essentially, it's just the new HUD-defined inspection protocol. So it tells us for affordable housing projects, what is the standard that inspectors are going to use when they come out to your project under whatever system they have to. The Inspire doesn't necessarily change the sample size of a project or the frequency with which you're having a monitoring. That still depends from program to program. But when you are due for an inspection, Inspire says, here's what the inspector should be looking at. Here's what they should put in their report. Here's the amount of time you have to correct it. And it tries to standardize all those things. And that really is the big purpose of Inspire. The idea of Inspire is to modernize, align, and consolidate these inspections. So we had a bunch of programs with slight differences in how inspections were happening, really trying to align under one common set of protocol, one common correction period, correction type, et cetera. Now, in particular, there are two main old types of inspections that kind of got thrown into this funnel and now get spit out on the other end as one new system of Inspire, right? So the first is the Uniform Physical Condition Standards, or UPCS. That is the inspection protocol that we've been using for years for programs like low-income housing tax credits, the home investment partnerships program, other HUD community planning and development programs. And then we also have the HQS side, the housing quality standards, and that's the inspection protocol that was used more in some of the voucher programs. So housing choice vouchers, project-based vouchers, and some similar HUD programs. So you have these two different inspection protocols that now are not only, so each of them gets sunset and removed, and they get combined into one new system that will be used across all the programs, and that is the Inspire system. All right, so let's talk about this applicability, right? So who is affected by Inspire and when? And the answer is really most of our programs are in fact affected by Inspire. The difference is going to be in the implementation timelines. So we know for a fact that Inspire applies to all three primary divisions of HUD. So when we think about HUD, sometimes we think about HUD as one unified kind of behemoth agency, but really for housing funding, there's three primary separate divisions within HUD, which don't always do the same thing. But fortunately with Inspire, they are. So that covers HUD multifamily. That is kind of the traditional project-based rental assistance version of Section 8, Section 811, 202, that type of housing. We also moved to Inspire under HUD Public and Indian Housing. That is public housing programs, as well as the Housing Choice Voucher, which is the tenant-based version of Section 8, or project-based vouchers. And then also HUD CPD, Community Planning and Development, which is programs like HOME, the National Housing Trust Fund, CDBG, Community Development Block Grants. These types of programs move under NSPIRE as well. So all three main divisions of HUD, and also the tax credit program. Now, the IRS has not given us any guidance specifically on NSPIRE, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. So we don't have an IRS notice or an updated Treasury regulation that specifically says we've got to use NSPIRE, but we'll show what the regulations do say for tax credits in a moment to explain why, in fact, yes, NSPIRE does apply to us. Now, the wild card here is we just honestly don't know what NSPIRE does or doesn't mean for the rural development programs. So for those of you who work with USDA rural development programs like Section 515, we don't have an answer from RD on what is going to happen here. Will RD move to an NSPIRE standard or not? Stay tuned. I'm certainly not an RD expert, but we really just don't know yet. And I've talked to a number of people in the industry who are kind of eagerly waiting to see if and when we get something from RD on this. But our HUD world, our tax credit world, going to NSPIRE. Now, originally what HUD said when they put out the final NSPIRE rules and standards earlier this year is they said we have one of two sets of effective dates. Either you're a public housing project, in which case we've already been using NSPIRE since 7/1 of 23, or you're everything else, which would go into effect 10/1 of 23. Okay, so just about a month ago, or almost 2 months ago now. But then some extensions came out. So let's make sure we understand those extensions. We have two different sets of extensions from HUD. The first extension came out from HUD CPD, and this was released on September 18th, would apply to programs like HOME, the Housing Trust Fund, and then some of the homelessness assistance programs through HUD, HOPWA, ESG, and COC. And what HUD said is, look, if you are a grantee who receives these funds from HUD and makes awards under these programs, you have the option to delay your implementation of NSPIRE up to 10/1/24. So you have up to one additional year under these programs to wait and go to NSPIRE. HUD specifically said we will put out a couple of separate notices. We will give you a notice that answers some specifics about what does NSPIRE mean for home and housing trust fund, so capital funding programs that build rental housing, and a separate notice for those homeless assistance grant programs. So we expect two additional notices from HUD CPD telling us more about what NSPIRE means for their programs. However, HUD specifically said, look, you already have a lot of NSPIRE information, probably enough to go ahead and get started. So you may choose to go ahead and implement immediately. Just make sure when this updated HUD policy guidance comes out, if you need to change your policies, that you do so. And this is the camp that IHCDA is in. So for our home and housing trust fund programs, we are going to go ahead and move towards a 1/1/24 implementation of NSPIRE to align with the tax credit program. So our inspector will be doing calendar year 2024 inspections under the NSPIRE protocol. Now, certainly if HUD puts out a home specific notice that means we need to adapt our policy a little bit, we'll adapt at such time that notice comes out, but we believe we have ample NSPIRE guidance to go ahead and start doing NSPIRE inspections. Okay, so that last bullet point, I apologize. I'll make sure to get that updated before we get these posted. These slides were also used at a conference last month, and that was before we made that decision. So we did finish out calendar year 2023 with UPCS for home and HTF, but we are moving to NSPIRE on 1/1/24. Okay. Now, the second exception we got separately from HUD is from the public and Indian housing side of HUD. They also gave an extension, but it was slightly different. So the HUD CPD extension was automatic. HUD PIH said if you are a public housing authority, a PHA, and you want to delay and continue using other standards, either UPCS or HQS, depending on the program, you could continue doing so for up to one more year until 10/1 of 24, but you've got to notify HUD in writing and declare the date that you will go live with NSPIRE. It has to be by 10/1/24, and public housing authorities are bound by what are called administrative plans that explain how they run their voucher programs. they have to amend their admin plan to publicly announce when they will be changing over to the NSPIRE protocol. IHCDA will be taking that full 1-year extension. We have a lot of various inspectors through our local subcontracting agencies who do inspections on housing choice voucher units. So that gives us more time to get that kind of small army of inspectors trained up and ready to go on the voucher side. So we will use the 10-1-24 implementation on vouchers. And at the very end of this presentation, we'll do a summary slide that goes back over what IHCDA is doing and when. All right. Everybody else, so our public housing already went live 7/1/23, no extension. HUD multifamily programs like PBRA 202-811, 10/1/23 was the implementation date with no extension. And the same thing with the tax credit program. There was never any type of extension released, so that 10/1/23 is still the effective date. Now, what IHCDA did, we wanted to go ahead and get 2023 inspections done under UPCS, is we went ahead, we had the vast majority, 95+% of our 2023 calendar year projects inspected by 10/1. We just went ahead and completed out our 23 inspections under the old UPCS system for consistency. And for tax credits, we will go live with NSPIRE on 1/1/24. All right. So another important note here on applicability, and we're kind of wrapping up this section here, is NSPIRE is retroactive to all projects. This is not just new projects funded after October of 2023 or some other date. This is truly a retroactive implementation. UPCS and HQS are just completely sunset. They're gone, fully replaced by the NSPIRE system, with one exception, because there's always something a little funky. And this is an area we do expect more information from that pending HUD CPD notice that is going to come out. HUD does acknowledge to say, look, there may be home or housing trust fund grantees, so states, cities who receive funds from HUD, that when they wrote their award agreement to the developer or project owner who built an affordable housing project, they may have gotten really specific in that legal award agreement and said, you have a 20-year affordability period during which we will inspect you under UPCS. So HUD has said, look, if you were super specific in your award agreement, you may be bound by that because that was a legal document signed by both parties. So these participating jurisdictions, cities, states that award these funds out on behalf of HUD, need to look back at their award language and determine, did we actually lock ourselves into having to continue to use an old inspection protocol on certain properties? Now, IHCDA has done a look through a number of award agreements from various years. We do not believe we have any award agreements out there that were that specific. So our plan is to move forward with NSPIRE retroactive for home and HTF going forward, because HUD says if the award agreement was neutral or vague on what inspection system you're using, if it just says we will do inspections every 3 years or whatever, then you can adapt. So stay tuned. We'll see more from HUD CPD on this. And then, if you have home funds from the city of Indianapolis, the city of Bloomington, city of Fort Wayne, wherever, you'll need to look at your award agreement and see what additional guidance those local PJs put out, because some home projects actually may still follow UPCS until the end of their affordability period. Otherwise, it's all NSPIRE going forward. All right. So let's talk about what we do have right now from HUD. So for those of you who are building your resource libraries and want to go straight to the source material, read these rules yourself. Here is the guidance that we do have. So we have the final kind of rule, that federal rule on NSPIRE that was released on May 11th. We have an inspection standards notice that talks about the methodology of conducting inspections. So that's an important one from June 22nd. A final standards notice. The final standards is really the biggest one, I would say, for property owners and property managers. This is a pretty lengthy document. It's going to define all 63 of the standards under NSPIRE. So for example, there will be a standard for doors. There will be a standard for windows, a standard for smoke detectors. So these are all items that would be looked at during an inspection. And what the standard does is it tells you what should an inspector look at when they're inspecting these parts of the building or the unit, what would result in a finding of noncompliance, how would that noncompliance need to be corrected, and in what time frame. So the standards is really the guidance that the inspector is going to use when they write up that report to tell you what they found at the project, and it's really guiding you then to understand what you need to do as the owner agent to correct those issues. So the standards, the final standards notice is probably the most important thing for all of you to look at. All right. We then would move on to, there's the scoring notice. So that's another important one. If you do have a housing type that gets a score assigned under, you would have used to been a REACT score, and now you're going to be getting an INSPIRE score. You'll want to refer to that scoring notice that tells you for public housing and HUD multifamily housing, how the scoring system is going to work. The way scoring is weighted has changed. It's still a 100-point scoring system, but you'll want to refer back to that scoring notice if that impacts you. All right. And then for those of you who administer, if we have any PHAs on the call who administer housing choice voucher programs, you will want to, okay, it looks like, yep, I just saw that. A slide vanished. We will go. So I think someone took over sharing a second ago somehow, because I saw a weird screen pop up and then they vanished. So yes, please make sure if you are not me to not hit the sharing button. All right, so you should see my screen again. And yes, please just be careful not to, if you're anybody else, to share. All right. So yes, so if you run a PHA, if you're running a voucher program, you'll want to refer to that administrative procedure notice from Public and Indian Housing Notice 23-28 as well. Okay. So what do we not have yet? Well, as we talked about, HUD CPD has told us they're going to give us 2 separate notices, one for Home and Housing Trust Fund capital programs, one for those homeless assistance grant programs. Those are not out yet. That's something we need to stay tuned to, in particular for understanding that issue of when home projects that are older might have to continue using UPCS. So that will be important to know. And then the wild card is we don't know if the IRS or Treasury will ever put out specific guidance to the tax credit program. And frankly, we don't know that we need it. And because what we do know from the tax credit side is we have the long-standing Treasury regulation. So if we go back and look at, this is often called the monitoring rules or the monitoring regulations, Treasury reg, the -5 regs here. So if you look at these regulations, what they say right now in the regulations is that the agency, when they do an inspection, must determine whether the buildings and units satisfy the uniform physical condition standards for public housing, as established at 24 Code of Federal Regulations 5.703. So you might look at this in first and say, oh, it says I continue to use UPCS. But if you now go to your favorite, however you like to pull up the Code of Federal Regulations online and go to 24 CFR 5.703, UPCS is gone and INSPIRE is there. So this cross-reference regulation that the IRS says you've got to use now is the INSPIRE standards. And it's pretty widely been accepted in the industry now to say, yeah, when you cross-reference that, we've got to move to INSPIRE for the tax credit program, regardless of whether or not the IRS ever puts out anything more specific about it. Okay. All right. So that, as I said, was kind of the most boring part of the presentation, but it's important for us to understand what are those notices that are out there so that you can obtain them, read them yourself, especially that final standards notice, to understand the different implementation dates. But now let's dig more into the meat of this, which is, what does INSPIRE actually say? What are the new inspection protocols? What are we looking at in inspections now? And how is this going to be different from the old UPCS or HQS inspections? So this is wording, but wording matters here, right? For years, we have always thrown out this old kind of mantra of we are providing decent, safe, sanitary, and in good repair. And that last part sometimes got left out, right? But you've always heard at various conferences or trainings, decent, safe, sanitary. That's what we're looking for with our housing. And that really came from, language out of UPCS and HQS. Under INSPIRE now, that changes though, because INSPIRE says, look, we have a very specific focus under what we should care about in inspection. We want units and buildings to be functionally adequate. So things that need to work. Building systems need to work, appliances need to work, et cetera, right? So it needs to function. It needs to be operable, so kind of similar, functionally adequate and operable. Things do the things they're supposed to do, and then free of health and safety hazards. And this isn't just random words in a preamble of a rule. When you go through the standards, you'll see this really is where HUD has moved the new inspection protocol. The priority of NSPIRE truly is function and safety, especially within the unit, but also within the building. What does this mean? It means we really de-emphasize, or in some cases completely ignore, some of what we would have cared about under UPCS and HQS, which were really more cosmetic type things. How does a building or a unit look? And then also sometimes things related to the way tenants were keeping their property. So let's look at three common examples. And I would assume these are examples that under old systems, many of you on this call were written up for, either in a REAC inspection and you lost points, or just in a regular inspection you had to correct it. But under NSPIRE, we don't care about overgrown vegetation unless it is a tripping or accessibility hazard. That's a functional or safety issue, right? If someone can't safely walk down the sidewalk or move a wheelchair down a sidewalk because there's brush everywhere, but that's different than, wow, that bush is giant and ugly and hasn't been trimmed. But if it doesn't affect function or safety, we don't care. Similarly, holes, dents, dings, if they do not pose a safety or functional issue, we're not concerned about dents, dings, scratches anymore. It's not about the cosmetic look. Now, this isn't saying we don't want our properties to look good, right? We try very hard for our affordable housing stock to look excellent. We really want people to be able to drive by our housing and not be able to immediately say, oh, that's affordable housing and it's not well maintained. We want to look like good market rate stock in our communities, right? But NSPIRE is not looking to punish owners for these types of minor items. And then finally, a good example here, and at the last live training I was at, someone applauded at this point, but tenant items blocking egress. So you have a tenant who, no matter how many times you tell them to stop doing it, they keep pushing the headrest of their bed up against a window. They're stacking stuff all over the place. If it's tenant items blocking egress, that's not the owner's fault, and it will not be written up under NSPIRE. Now, obviously, things that you put in the unit, you need to make sure there's proper egress for, but you will not be penalized for those tenants who are stacking, moving furniture, and blocking their own ability to safely get out of windows or doors. Okay, so just a few examples of things where cosmetic, tenant-caused stuff is less of a focus because these would still be functional and safe. All right. So under NSPIRE, we go now to what are called 3 inspectable areas. And you may have read some summaries of NSPIRE that really talk about this as being one of the changes. It technically is a change. UPCS had 5 inspectable areas, but they really just condensed them down. So the inspectable areas here are the unit itself, the inside, which is everything inside a building that's not within an individual unit, and then the outside, which is everything outside, right? So that kind of combines under UPCS. You would have had separately like the grounds versus the outside systems, and inside systems versus inside common areas. So it just really says, let's keep it simple. What's going on in the unit? What's going on in the building? What's going on the outside grounds? Okay. And let's look at some examples of each of these. All right. So the unit, pretty self-explanatory. This is the interior component where the individual resident is living. So an inspector is going to be looking inside the unit at things like the bathroom, carbon monoxide detectors, smoke detectors, the electrical system, water heater, windows, all kinds of things, right? All the stuff we're going to find in a unit. What's important, though, is this kind of new concept, not necessarily new things that wouldn't have been a problem before, but this new concept that NSPIRE calls affirmative habitability requirements. These are kind of minimum threshold must things that the inspector must confirm are in place when they go into every unit, okay? Within a unit, I believe it's 11 of these. We'll see if I'm right as we progress through the slides, but let's walk through each of these. So within the unit, we need to confirm that there's hot and cold running water in both the bathroom and the kitchen, including adequate safe sources of drinking water. Okay, so we've got to have our hot and cold running water. There has to be a bathroom in proper operating condition, and that means there's at a minimum a sink, a bathtub or shower, and a flushable toilet. Okay, pretty simple. This gets a little kind of specific here with smoke detectors. So we've got to have at least one battery operated or hardwired smoke detector on every level of the unit, inside each bedroom, within 21 feet of any door to a bedroom as measured along a path of travel. And if there's a smoke detector installed outside of a bedroom, if it's separated from an adjacent living area by a door, we need to also install it on the living area side of the door. So again, these are affirmative habitability requirements. As we said, this is retroactive to all projects as we go into 2024. So this is an area where we definitely see some potential for existing projects to run afoul. So it's going to be important for owner agents to really go and say, under these NSPIRE affirmative habitability requirements, if we go in our units, our smoke detector is going to be in all of these areas as required, right? So I would say smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, and in a moment we'll talk about GFCI outlets. Those are some areas where your units may currently be in compliance, but once we switch to NSPIRE, you may find you need to go back and install more detectors or switch out some outlets. Those are really some areas we think are going to be areas of focus. Okay. So the fourth affirmative action within the unit, we've got to have a living room area and a kitchen area. The kitchen needs to have a sink, a cooking appliance, a fridge, a food preparation area, and somewhere to store food. If this inspection is being done for voucher purposes, housing choice vouchers, tenant-based or project-based, there needs to be at least one bedroom or living room for every 2 people in the household. So that is an occupancy standard for the voucher programs. There are also carbon monoxide detection requirements we have to meet. Some of that is defined later within the final notice on the standards, but some of it they say, look, we may put additional information out through Federal Register as we continue understanding best practices and thinking through carbon monoxide. So just be aware here, this language within the NSPIRE rule specifically says as established through Federal Register notices. So we need to be aware of existing notices out there, especially that affect the voucher programs, and then make sure we stay tuned for any additional Federal Registers that may come out around this issue. All right, so we get into the outlet issue. Number 7 is pretty straightforward. Within every habitable room inside the unit, we need to have 2 working outlets or 1 working outlet and a permanent light fixture. Okay. Now, where we may see some properties that aren't fully compliant right now is number 8. And this is if you're any outlet within 6 feet of a water source must be GFCI protected. Okay. So think about all of our water sources. If we're near the kitchen sink or the bathroom sink, if we're near the washing machine. So thinking through, are all of our kitchen and bathroom outlets within 6 feet of the sinks GFCI protected? Likely not. Are the laundry room GFCI or outlets GFCI protected, right? So this is a new affirmative requirement effective for your projects. This might be an area where unfortunately you're going to need to go back and switch out some outlets with GFCI protection. So we're definitely highlighting this, right? Make sure you're meeting those affirmative GFCI requirements, those affirmative smoke detector requirements. They may be a little different than what used to be required. I was right. There are 11. All right, number 9, for certain climate zones, this includes the state of Indiana, you must have a permanently installed heating source in every unit, and units cannot contain unvented space heaters that are burning gas, oil, or kerosene. Anywhere within a unit where there is an elevated surface that drops 30 inches or more vertically, we have to have a guardrail, and then every kitchen and every bathroom must have a permanently mounted light fixture, not just a lamp and an outlet. Okay, so those are our affirmative requirements in every unit. And again, if you're thinking through the properties you own and manage, this will be a good checklist as you start to do your own internal inspections and prepare for the fact that whoever your funders are going to be inspecting to these standards next year. How would you score? How are you going to do on this inspection? Do you need to start now going back and making any changes within your units? All right, moving on to inspectable area 2. So now we're no longer in the unit, but we're in the building still. So this is the other inside. So this includes building systems, common areas, anything kind of within the walls of the building that's not in someone's particular unit. Long list of things this may include: basements, attached garages, carports, common areas, restrooms, mechanical rooms, stairwells, etc. So again, all those things outside of the unit. We have 6 affirmative habitability requirements here that the inspector must look for. Some of these are going to look very familiar to what we just saw within the unit. There has to be at least one battery operated or hardwired smoke detector on every level. We're going to have to meet the carbon monoxide detection standards that are established in the Federal Register. Same thing as before, any of our outlets within 6 feet of a water source must be GFCI protected. Anywhere we have a 30-inch vertical drop, we have to have guardrails. Kitchens and bathrooms and common areas must have permanently mounted light fixtures. And just like in the units, we cannot have, we can't be burning gas, oil, or kerosene as a heat source within the building. And then finally, we get to outside. This is the building site, grounds, any exterior components, you know, if you have HVAC systems on the outside of the building, et cetera. So here we're looking at systems, we're looking at fencing, retaining walls, the grounds, driveways, walkways, et cetera. This would also be the roof. We only have 2 affirmative requirements here, not that there could only be 2 possible issues with everything on the outside of the building, but the 2 affirmative requirements that must be checked. Same thing, outlets. Now, the good thing here, we have heard confirmation that just the fact that it may rain outside, that does not mean everywhere outside has to be GFCI protected. But if you're within 6 feet of a some type of faucet, spigot, etc., you would have to be if you're near that water source, you would have to be GFCI protected, and then the same 30-inch guardrail requirement for vertical drops. So very similar, but a slightly different across the 3 areas. And again, I think this is one of the best spots to start as you're thinking about converting to NSPIRE. As you're assessing your properties, go through these affirmative habitability checklists. So the 11 unit requirements, the 6 inside requirements, the 2 outside, and do a self-assessment of your project, because every inspector should be definitively looking for all those things as they start doing inspections. All right, so when the inspector comes out and is doing your NSPIRE inspection, we're not going to talk about the notification or the sampling, because that's still going to vary from program to program. NSPIRE does not standardize how much notice you get for an inspection, what % of units get looked at. That remains at the program level. Okay, so the inspector has come out, they have done the inspection, they've done whatever sample size they have to for that program, they've looked for the affirmative habitability requirements, any other issues they noted while going through the sample of units. They are now, for every issue that they find, they're going to assign that issue one of 4 severity levels. Okay, the worst possible level that an issue can be assigned is life-threatening. And what HUD basically says here is life-threatening means there is a high risk of death to a resident, right? This is the worst type of issue you can have. Under NSPIRE, if the inspector finds a life-threatening or severe issue, they are required before they leave the site to immediately notify you of that issue and give you a life-threatening or severe report, and that starts an immediate 24-hour correction period. Okay, so before they leave, they're immediately generating a report for you of your life-threatening and severe issues. You may not get the report with the other issues until a few days later, a week later, whatever, but you'll immediately know what was life-threatening and severe, and your 24-hour clock starts. Severe, just slightly less than life-threatening. It means there is a high risk of disability, injury, or illness to a resident. So maybe they're not going to be immediately killed like with a life-threatening issue, but still a strong safety risk for residents. Under most of our programs, that's a 24-hour correction period. The one caveat is if it's an inspection for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, not just that they're an HCV tenant living in a tax credit unit and it's a tax credit inspection, but if the purpose of the inspection was this was an HCV inspection, because HCV is using a variety of landlords who are just willing to accept vouchers, not necessarily receiving special funding, accept the rental assistance. HUD gives a little more time knowing some of these are mom and pop landlords, and we want to work with them and keep them engaged in the program to keep accepting voucher holders. So a severe issue in an HCV unit gets a 30-day correction period. That's the only real difference there, right? All the other programs, 24 hours. The next level of severity is going to be moderate. And HUD says that, yeah, over time, this could present a moderate risk of some type of health issue, could cause harm over time, could lead to a chronic condition, but it's not an imminent something's going to bad happen today, right? So this would be a 30-day correction period across all programs, and the inspector is not required to immediately hand that report to the owner agent. And then last, the best possible level of an issue would be low. And it says, hey, this is affecting habitability in some way. Maybe it's a functional issue, but doesn't really present a health or safety risk. It needs fixed. No one's going to die. No one's going to get sick. You have under every program except housing choice vouchers, a correction is needed, and you have 60 days. The House or Choice voucher program, again, because these are individual independent landlords who are agreeing to accept vouchers. If the purpose of the inspection was for housing choice voucher compliance, a low issue actually just passes the housing choice voucher inspection now and does not require correction. Now, if it's a housing choice voucher tenant living in a tax credit project, the reality is, while that inspection was for HCV purposes, and they're going to say you passed your HCV inspection, that you have a low issue there. When the tax credit inspector comes out, you're going to fail. So it would obviously behoove you as the owner agent to go ahead and correct it because it's going to fail those other requirements. All right, so there's a question here about the correction period, 24 hours. Does an inspector have to come back out? That will really vary based on the severity of the issue and who the agency is that's conducting this inspection. The agency absolutely could say this was a severe enough issue, or maybe it's a partner that we've had issues with in the past and we just frankly don't trust that you're going to fix it right. The agency, would certainly be in their full authority, whether it's a state housing agency, a public housing agency, whatever, to say, we're coming back, you have 24 hours to fix it. And, in the next day, we're going to come out and make sure you fixed it. That would be the right. They could also just say you got 24 hours to fix it. And then, after that, you need to immediately send us proof of corrections via work orders, invoices, photos, an affidavit certifying correction, whatever it may be. So it might vary from issue to issue, could vary by the policy of the agency that did the inspection. There's not necessarily any affirmative requirement that means you must go out and do another inspection. If you believe that you can verify it was done through, again, some type of work order, invoice, et cetera, showing that someone came out and fixed it within that allowable time frame. There's a question about, is there a responsibility to notify the tenants that an issue fell within a certain category? No, I'm not aware of anything that necessarily says you must disclose to the tenant that this issue was a low issue versus a severe issue. You're just going to have to let that tenant know that we're going to have to come into your unit and fix the issue, right? And obviously, if it's life-threatening or severe, it's going to be important to tell that tenant, hey, I know we're not giving you much notification, but we are required to get this corrected in 24 hours. So I think that would be the example where you might have to kind of disclose to a tenant because you might be inconveniencing them with very little notice that you're coming in and doing repairs. But I think between a 30-day and a 60-day correction, letting a tenant know, hey, that was moderate versus low. I'm not aware of any specific requirement there. Again, the main focus is just on getting it fixed. Good questions. All right. And this all comes straight out of that final NSPIRE standards, which I said was such a critical document. So the first couple pages talk about this severity level system and the correction period. So we will, so you'll want to look at that. That has all this information. You can take my word on the slide, but you'll find it there. And then the rest of that notice gets into this on a standard by standard. So again, the window standard, what related to windows is life-threatening, what's severe, what's moderate, what's low, all that is identified. So ideally, in an ideal world, right, no matter which inspector you had, if they came out today, they would write up the report the same. The goal of NSPIRE is really to get rid of that discretion of, well, your inspector was Matt, and I said, yeah, I think that's a moderate issue. And instead, Bob comes out tomorrow and says, I think it's severe. These standards really tell you kind of item by item what's severe, what's moderate, what's low, and then there's no discretion on setting these timeframes. It's not sure, I'll give you 90 days. You've got to use the 24-hour, 30 days, 60 days. So you should be seeing more consistent severity levels, more consistent correction periods in your reports going forward. We have a question about CO2 detectors. And so, yeah, so, we'll talk just a little bit later more about CO2 detectors and smoke detectors. And one thing that we'll mention towards the end here, right, is that compliance with INSPIRE does not necessarily mean you're going to comply with other funding requirements, right? So you might pass an INSPIRE inspection or standard, but your funder gave you points to do something else, or requires in their policy that you exceed a certain standard. So it will still be important to know, did I have a funder who made me go above and beyond? Now, related to this specific issue, IHCDA is looking at this matter. We may have in some of our old funding policies some carbon monoxide requirements that are stricter than INSPIRE. So we will be looking to align to INSPIRE as best as we can there. And that is an area that IHCDA does plan to put some additional guidance out on. But our overall goal will be to align with INSPIRE as much as possible. So good question. All right. So let's continue on then. So those were the health and severity levels. I want to just quickly, we're not going to look at every one of these, but I want to just show you everything that could possibly be a life-threatening condition. Because again, you'd only have 24 hours. And if you were in a scoring system, these are going to drop your score pretty fast. And obviously under multifamily public housing programs, the lower you score, the more frequent you're going to get inspected. And you obviously want a good score. So this just shows that there's a variety of things that could become life-threatening. If a call for aid system's not working right, you're not doing what you should be doing with carbon monoxide alarms, fire risks related to chimneys, clothes dryer exhaust, missing doors, blocked egress. Again, not that the tenant put their personal belonging there, but other egress issues could be life-threatening. Again, just quickly going through this list, electrical issues would be life-threatening, missing or damaged exit signs, issues with fire escapes, fire extinguishers, the way flammable or combustible items are stored not being correct, missing guardrails where someone could fall and get seriously injured, particularly persons with disabilities, HVAC issues. If there's not, this is an interesting one. It's specific. It's life-threatening if it's between October 1st and March 31st and the heat is not working, right? It's not life-threatening other times of the year. It's not life-threatening if the cooling system's not working. Now, it would still need corrected. The life-threatening here is making sure that that tenants have heat during the fall and winter months. And then other things that could be life-threatening, gas or oil leaks, presence of high levels of mold, issues with smoke alarms, issue with sprinkler systems, structural issues. If there was only one toilet installed and it's missing, so you go into a unit and there's no toilet at all, that's considered a life-threatening issue. And then certain water heater issues as well. So you'll see here a large number of issues could result in life-threatening. Again, our goal is to not have any issues, but we certainly want to avoid life-threatening, of course, for the better of our tenants, but also to avoid having to do 24-hour turnaround corrections and to avoid the hit to our score for scored projects. Now, not going to read through these full list. This slide is out here for your convenience. As I said, we will get these slides posted on our website. This is the 63 areas that have a standard within INSPIRE. So for example, if you wanted to know what does INSPIRE say about entry doors, right? This is an alphabetical list. I would go and I'd say, I need to, in the INSPIRE final notice, I need to go pull standard 10. These are all in order. And under standard 10, it's going to define what is an entry door. It's going to tell me why an entry door is important. It's going to tell me what an inspector should be looking at to inspect entry doors. And then it will tell me under there what would constitute a life-threatening, severe, moderate, or low severity issue related to an entry door. Okay. So it's really a nice checklist for every one of these types of issues to tell you, here's what the inspector should be looking at and why, and here's what level of severity they're going to give you. Really pretty nicely laid out. What I want to do is just walk through a couple of these to give some examples, especially of some areas where I think that either things have changed or where there's probably a high likelihood of seeing NSPIRE findings, at least in the first few years. So let's start with the smoke detector issue. So we already talked about smoke detectors back in the affirmative habitability requirements. Those are affirmative requirements under both the unit as well as the building interior. And so now we look at if there was issues related to smoke detectors, how would this show up within the standards? So when we go to standard number 52 within the NSPIRE final standards document, it will tell us there's 3 types of deficiencies with a smoke detector. All of these are life-threatening and would require a 24-hour correction. But the inspector is going to write up that there was a life-threatening issue with a smoke alarm if they were not installed where they're supposed to be. So go back, look at that affirmative requirements. Everywhere a smoke detector is required to be, was there one there? If they're there, but they're obstructed, or it's there, but the inspector pushes the button and it does not produce an audio and or visual alarm when tested. So the inspector is expected now is to be looking, is it there in all the places it should be, and to push them all and make sure that they all sound. Okay. Any one of those would result in an immediate life-threatening issue, 24-hour correction period. Ideally, of course, your goal is going to be, if you have backups on site, to correct it on site before the inspector even leaves. Okay. Carbon monoxide alarm, obviously another big item. We've had a few questions about this already. This is similar. There's 3 things that could go wrong. It's not where it's supposed to be. It's obstructed, or we push the button and it doesn't make an alarm. So very similar to smoke detectors. As with smoke detectors, it's a 24-hour correction life-threatening issue. Unlike smoke detectors, it's not quite as simple as here's all the places it has to be. The NSPIRE standard gets very specific on where carbon monoxide alarms are required. It is required in any unit or building if there are fuel burning appliances or fuel burning fireplaces. If there are bedrooms or bathrooms attached, or a bathroom attached to a bedroom, and there's some type of adjacent space where combustion gases can flow into those spaces. If there's a unit or a bedroom that's served by a forced air furnace in a building, that would require a carbon monoxide alarm. And then if you have a unit or a bedroom that's 1 story or less above an attached garage, that may require a carbon monoxide detector as well, depending on the way the ventilation system works for vehicle exhaust. This is a summary to try to explain when would carbon monoxide detectors be required, but you'll see I've put the note here. You really want to go. This is a multiple page standard. You'll want to pull standard number 5 and dig deeper to make sure you understand from an NSPIRE standpoint, is a carbon monoxide detector required? Now, of course, it's important, as I mentioned earlier, it may be that NSPIRE says, hey, I'm all electric. I don't have any fuel burning, no forced air furnace. We don't have garages, etc. NSPIRE would allow me to not have a carbon monoxide detector. It could be some funding source on the project still has a policy that says we expected carbon monoxide to be installed just as a backup. It could be a local code or ordinance requires a carbon monoxide detector. So following NSPIRE does not mean you'll make everyone happy, but it would mean you would pass the NSPIRE inspection. Okay. We already mentioned this one, but another area where I think a lot of opportunity for failure on an inspection in the next few months is that GFCI issue. So there's 2 types of deficiencies here. The deficiency 1 would be that there is a GFCI or AFCI outlet that it looks like it's there, it's in place, doesn't obviously look broken, but if you push the test reset button, it shows that it's inoperable. The other would be that we have an outlet within 6 feet of a water source, and remember that's in the unit, inside the building, or outside the building. So we would need to make sure that is now a GFCI outlet. Either of these issues is a severe, not life-threatening, but severe. Severe would be a 24-hour correction period, with the exception of a 30-day correction period on HCV. All right. And then the last one I wanted to show as an example here is infestation, not to gross anybody out or make anyone start squirming and scratching. But the reality is under some of the old systems, UPCS, HQS, sometimes this was a very gray area. Like when should we write up an infestation? When is it not something that's really an inspectable issue? Is it a health department issue? And NSPIRE really kind of defines this more and does land on saying an infestation is an inspectable issue. It would be written up by the inspector, it would affect score, and it would require correction. Now, this is a kind of complicated system because it goes through different types of issues. So every infestation is not made the same in HUD's eyes. There's an evidence that there is one or two cockroaches. That's a moderate issue. There's extensive cockroaches, lots of them. HUD says that's still just moderate. So HUD is not as concerned with cockroaches as a health and safety issue. It's a problem. It needs fixed. It's still a moderate, but we get it corrected. Moderate would allow us 30 days. Bed bugs, light evidence of bed bugs, and there's more information within standard 32 on there's evidence they're there versus there's a full infestation, how you determine that. But if there's just evidence of some bed bugs, that would be moderate. If there's an extensive bed bug infestation, that would be a severe. So that's a 24-hour turnaround, right? So thinking through, we're gonna have to very quickly get out a heat treatment or whatever we're doing and have that company ready to go. Mice, evidence that the mice are there, moderate. If there's an extensive mouse infestation, severe. Same with rats, either moderate or severe, depending on the size here, or if it looks like it's an extensive. And then other pests, wasps, bees, squirrels, birds, bats, etc. HUD says would be moderate. So you'll see here their biggest concerns is lots of rats, mice, or bed bugs. Now, this is a little gross, but we're going to go over it because it's in the NSPIRE standards. What would an inspector find as evidence? Maybe they actually see a rat just sitting on the counter. More likely, they're going to see other signs. So yes, there could be a live or dead animal, but other signs that would be written up under NSPIRE would be droppings, urine trails, holes that have been chewed, showing clear kind of, yeah, something's chewing here. I'm sorry, I apparently liked urine trails. I listed it twice. Eggs, egg casings, shed skins, blood trails, etc. Again, gross, not trying to make anyone squeamish. We'll move on now. But the point is you don't have to see a live animal or actual bugs crawling around. If you see evidence that things are in there, it does get written up now with either a moderate or severe. So we are going to have a turnaround time on this. Okay, and I see a couple questions rolling in, and we'll get to those in a minute because I'm almost through the slides here, and we're starting to get towards a Q&A type component. All right, so that was just a few. We went through 4 of the 63 standards. My goal was just to show some of these areas that are kind of new, or to just, again, to show that layout, that what the standard is going to do is tell you, here's everything that could go wrong, here's the deficiency level, and then we know those deficiency levels automatically mean either 24 hours, 30 days, or 60-day correction period. That's the same across all of the 63 areas. So what should you expect if you are an inspector? How should you write an inspection report? Or if you are an owner agent, what should you expect to see in your inspection report? Okay. So when we think about this NSPIRE, this whole model of how NSPIRE works, this is what we'd be looking at. So the inspector, for every issue, they should be telling us what building was that associated with, what area was I looking at? So those 3 inspectable areas. Was I in a unit? Was I inside the building? Or was I on the outside? Which standard was there a violation of? So which of those 63 options will give a standard and a standard number? What was the specific deficiency? And remember, each standard tells me these are the things that are a problem. If it's not in that list, it's not an NSPIRE deficiency. What was the specific location? What's the safety determination? So either life-threatening, severe, moderate, or low. And then what's my correction period? And that's not a choice. That's coming directly from the safety determination. So here's an example of what an NSPIRE inspection report might look like. I would say I was in building 1. The area I was looking at was within a particular unit. The standard that was violated was grab bars. The deficiency is that there is a grab bar there, but it's not secure. It's in unit 101. When I look at the grab bar standard, that tells me that an insecure grab bar is a moderate risk, and a moderate risk is always a 30-day period, right? So this is what it's going to, of course, every inspector will have a slightly different format that their agency uses, whether it's inspection software or manual, but this is the type of information you should expect for every issue that you're getting. So you'll have a list of, we found 10 things. Every one of those 10 things will tell you where it was, what the deficiency is, what the health and safety determination is, and how long you have to correct it. All right. So a few other notes. This is just kind of some miscellaneous things we had not yet had the chance to talk about. Then we'll go into a few IHCDA reminders, and then we'll go to Q&A. So 3 things I wanted to hit on. We've touched these maybe lightly, but I wanted to kind of drill the point home. This one we've not talked about yet. So for those of you who are on the public housing or HUD multifamily side, not vouchers, but looking at, this would be things like public housing, Section 8 project-based rental assistance, 202, 811, et cetera. The owner agent or the PHA, if it's public housing, is required under NSPIRE now to do a self-inspection of every unit in their projects at least annually. And what you are doing on those 100% self-inspections is ensuring the affirmative habitability requirements are met, the 11 within the unit, the 6 within the building, the 2 on the outside, and you are also inspecting to see if you find deficiencies with any NSPIRE standards. So again, that's just a different kind of. So first of all, this is important to know, you're required under those programs, not under tax credits, although maybe it's a best practice, to do that annual self-inspection. You must maintain copies of your self-inspection reports for at least 3 years, and you have to document it as if you're an inspector. You have to identify, here are the deficiencies I found during my self-inspection, here was the health and safety determination, and then you need to document your file showing you corrected your self-inspection issues within that allowable 24-hour, 30-day, or 60-day time period. So this is very, HUD's taking this seriously, wanting owner agents to report this and to catch their own issues. Hopefully that'll make it the actual inspections go smoother because you're catching your own stuff, and it should be a good service to make sure our tenants are living in functionally adequate, operable, and safe housing. Okay. Now, the second thing here, and I have mentioned this, but just wanted to again drill this a little bit more. I passed an NSPIRE inspection. Does that mean everyone is going to be happy with the project? Not necessarily. As you may notice as we went through this, NSPIRE it has certain things related to fire safety, but it's not necessarily the entire International Fire Code. It's not necessarily going as far as all the accessibility requirements from fair housing or 504 or ADA. So just be mindful that because we're doing a specific, is it functional, is it safe inspection, that doesn't mean that at some other time another inspector might say, hey, your building actually doesn't meet fire code, it doesn't meet a local ordinance, this doesn't seem ADA compliant. That's okay. That doesn't mean that your NSPIRE inspector messed up and is an unqualified inspector. They just have a very specific set of standards that they're looking for. So just make sure, don't assume you pass that NSPIRE inspection that there's no way that something else is going to come up on the property. And then, as we mentioned, if you were not previously scored under NSPIRE, don't worry, you're not going to a scoring system now. For those of you who have always received a true score, you will continue to get a score under that new weighted scoring system, and make sure to refer to the Public Housing and HUD Multifamily scoring notice for additional details on that system. So let's wrap up a little bit. For those of you who work with IHCDA programs, now again, you have a tax credit project in another state, you have home funds from another city, et cetera. You'll need to find out more about their implementation schedule. There are federal requirements they have to follow, but they have some flexibility. This paragraph comes straight out of a red notice that we released publicly a couple weeks ago. So for projects that we would have been inspecting using UPCS, the Uniform Physical Condition Standards, we're no longer doing UPCS effective 1/1/24. So this covers tax credits and related programs like bonds, TCAP, et cetera. This covers home, National Housing Trust Fund, CDBG, basically all of our capital funding programs from IHCDA. We are going NSPIRE inspections, and you will receive NSPIRE reports starting 1/1/24 and beyond. Housing quality standards. So for the housing choice voucher programs, including project-based vouchers, and then a couple of our smaller tenant-based rental assistance programs, Home TBRA and Housing First. Those all use the housing quality standards inspection. We will continue using housing quality standards until 10/1 of 24. So we have almost a year left of using HQS before we convert to NSPIRE. That allows us, again, more time to work with our local contracting agencies who help us run these programs in the field and to make sure they are ready to go. But IHCDA's internal inspectors and our friends at Van Marder who inspect all those capital funded projects, they're NSPIRE trained and we're ready to go 1/1/24 on those other programs, as in many cases required by the rules. All right. I know that was a lot of information. We got about 20 minutes left. We may not need all that time, of course. We do have a couple questions in the chat, so I'll start there and work on addressing these issues, and then we'll open it up. Feel free to either put questions into the chat or you're welcome to come off mute and ask a question verbally as well. So the first comment in the chat was from Chuck. NSPIRE requires that a smoke alarm be installed within 10 feet of cooking sources. This had not been required on older properties. Would a battery-operated, non-interconnected smoke alarm meet the standard? So it would indeed meet the NSPIRE standard. The NSPIRE standard allows battery-operated. Now, you may have a project where other smoke detectors, because of a funding source that you have in place, are required to be interconnected. IHCDA's qualified allocation plan for often requires interconnected, hardwired. But in this case, we understand you're going to have to go back and do some retrofitting of properties to meet the NSPIRE standard. The battery operated would meet an NSPIRE standard, so we would allow that for the retrofit to add the additional smoke detectors in. The next question was, with a severe category and a tenant moves out, would that indicate a casualty loss form would need to be sent in? Not necessarily, it could. So a casualty loss is specific to what the IRS defines as a casualty loss, which is kind of what insurance world would call quote, an act of God, right? So this is a fire, a flood, a tornado, strong winds, etc. Usually what we see is fire, flood, storms is what we usually see in Indiana as being casualty loss events. So if those events happen, we probably haven't actually done an inspection necessarily. It's just, oh my gosh, the building caught fire or a storm hit. Per IHCDA policy, owner agents are required to notify IHCDA within 10 days of one of those events happening and to submit the casualty loss form to IHCDA. If a severe issue was found on an inspection, because a severe could be a number of things, right? A severe, as we saw, could be mice, it could be rats. That wouldn't be a casualty loss. It would be a severe issue under NSPIRE, and we would require the 24-hour severe correction, but it wouldn't be reported or treated as a casualty loss. If the inspector went out and said, oh, there's severe damage to this unit, and we can tell it's because there was a flood or there was a fire, and that property owner had not properly submitted their casualty loss form within 10 days, we would, of course, require them to report that, submit the initial police, fire department reports, all the stuff they should have submitted at the time. So it would just vary. Sometimes, yes, we would uncover to say, oops, there was a casualty loss here. You didn't report to us the way you were supposed to. We need you to retroactively send that stuff in so that we can document the casualty loss. But not every severe issue would relate to a casualty loss. So good questions. All right. So Lori had a question about NSPIRE requires at least one smoke detector on each level for common areas. Do you know if this is required if there is a building-wide fire suppression system? I am not aware of any exception that would say if there's fire suppression, we get out of that rule. My read of the smoke detector standard, I believe that was standard 52 or 53, is that that's just a requirement that you have to have one on each level of the common areas, and that's in the affirmative requirements as well. I can look back on that, Lori, but I believe it's a requirement regardless of sprinkling or suppression systems. Any other questions? All right. So not seeing any now, I'll make just a few closing comments and then I'll check the chat again after I make some comments. So a couple things I wanted to close with. Action steps for you as an owner agent. One, if you are in public housing or HUD multifamily housing, you're going to have to start doing annual self-inspections. So think about, what is that process? When do you do them? Do you do them all at once? Do you stagger them throughout the year? But how do you document that every year you're inspecting every unit? And you're going to need to create some type of inspection form or something, because you have to document your file to show that you you checked for all the affirmative habitability requirements, and also if you found any NSPIRE deficiencies, that you gave them a severity level. So you're going to need to think through, what is that form? What is that filing system? You have to keep it for 3 years. You may want to think about, if you're not required to do so, you're under another program, is it a best practice? Maybe you don't do 100%, but do you voluntarily do a percent of your units as self-inspection, so that you're getting used to looking for those affirmative requirements, trying to prevent these issues. So I would challenge everyone representing an owner agent on this call to think through that self-inspection process. Does it apply to you? If so, how are you meeting the HUD requirements? If not, are you going to voluntarily do some measure of it yourself? And if so, how and when? So that's one piece. Regardless of whether you're going to do it on an ongoing basis, if you say, we're not every year going to do an inspection of the project, I would I would try to do it sooner than later, with NSPIRE going into effect 1/1/24 for IHCDA funded properties. But I would do one soon, because as we've been talking about in the chat and as we go, you might have a project right now that has passed UPCS with flying colors, that does not meet the new smoke detector, CO detector, GFCI requirements, et cetera. So you might need to start bulk ordering and getting some new detectors installed, might be replacing outlets. So I would say, and now is the time to do some self-inspection, especially on some of the older properties where unfortunately you're not getting grandfathered in as is. You're going to have to adapt to these standards. So be thinking through that as well. So that's really what I think is the homework for owner agents. Do those self-inspections, identify those areas, especially those key, what I think are the kind of obvious misses. And then, of course, just pull down those inspection standards. Is it fun to read through 63 inspection standards? I think it's like a 280-page document. Maybe just look through one or two a day, and over time, make sure you understand what NSPIRE says. So I would challenge you to pull that document down and make sure you have that information. From IHCDA side, as I mentioned, we did put out a revised 2024 compliance manual a couple weeks ago. That manual has been updated to refer to NSPIRE. We list all the affirmative habitability requirements in the manual. We've replaced references to UPCS. We put the new severity levels, the new correction period. So all this stuff really is codified. We did not list out all 63 standards. We're not going to replicate a 289-page HUD document in our compliance manual. But again, the severity levels, the correction periods, and the 11 unit, 6 interior, 2 exterior affirmative requirements are all in the manual now for easy reference as well. We will be getting on that compliance webpage as well, along with the manuals. We'll get these slides. We did catch just one or two very minor errors as we were going through, just a couple little typos. I'll make sure to get that cleaned up, and we'll get that posted on the website probably here within the next few days. So if anyone wants to refer back to these slides, you're able to do so as well. So, and then if you are confused and trying to remember, hey, wait, what was that situation with the when's IHCDA implementing? Wait, some of the programs aren't until October, some are January. As I mentioned, we did release that real estate department notice a couple weeks ago, and I'm looking real fast. Your screen probably just changed. I'm just looking for a number for you. That is Red Notice 23-52. So you can find that on our website as well, and that has that clear breakdown explaining when we're implementing for each program. Presumably you saw that notice because that's how you got the link to this training, but feel free to refer back to that for that implementation schedule. So those were my final comments. I do see we had one last question in the chat. So if we had inspections occurring before 1/1/24, will those be checked as NSPIRE? If it is an IHCDA inspection, if it's one of those very few we had left for calendar year 2023, we are still finishing 2023 under UPCS to be consistent for all properties in this calendar year. So it will be 1/1/24 and beyond our 2024 calendar year inspections that we start doing NSPIRE on for the capital funding program. So yep, if you just happen to be like the last tax credit project we're inspecting this year and you have an inspection next week, you would still be inspected under UPCS. All right. Well, thank you all for your time and attention today. These were some great questions. Feel free to email me if you need a copy of that notice, can't find it on our website, or need a copy of the compliance manual. Like I said, give it a couple days, but if by the end of the week you can't find these slides on our website, they'll be on the compliance page. Feel free to email me. I'll send you the slides as well. But we hope this was useful information, and feel free to reach out via phone or email if you have any questions. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.